When I faint under the agonizing trials of this world, I turn inward to the storehouse of experiences from my life. There are many rooms contained there, but the finest of the rooms is the room in which I keep my strongest faith. The room is a place where I can sit and listen to the thumping and bumping of the storms that rage outside my mind. It is in the room where I feel safest from the threat of danger or pain. When I am in the room, I am in a place of safety. It is during these times of safety that I am free to sit and weave. There was a time of forgetting the room. It has always been there, of course, waiting to keep me company. But I had to go through the process of forgetting and losing my way in order to go through the process of remembering and finding my way again. Forgetting was important. Forgetting all that was back there, back at the introduction to the room filled with faith. The room with such an important purpose. That purpose was remembering. To understand remembering, first one must understand what it is to forget. Forget those times when malice was mundane. It was during those times that they found me. Who were they? They were the faceless others who used words to comfort themselves as they went about changing others' lives forever. Oh, there were anointed others there too. It's an important point to point that out. But for this point, in this state far from knowing He who gives faith, I need to focus on the faceless others who used words to comfort themselves as they went about changing others' lives forever. I could only see their surface actions. I had no idea that He was working their menial intentions for good. I had no idea that there could be an eternal purpose behind everything. The everything outside the storehouse of our lives, and specifically the everything inside of them. They, the faceless others, used words like battered, neglected, abandoned, and unfortunate. They gave quiet sighs and muted exclamations of, "Oh my," and "poor dear." And after they said these words, it seemed to me as if they felt better about themselves and the choices they made. It seemed to me like they took control. That is, they took the boundary markers of my life and built strong stone barriers between what was and what they wanted it to be. To me, it appeared they effortlessly made decisions that changed my life forever. When I think about those times, I am confronted with the image of ripping sheets. Something very strong and closely woven together gave way all at once. As terrible as that rendering was, one single sheet into many threads, there was a curious purpose behind inevitable surrender. It was surrender for the sake of survival. You see, now I know that somehow, even way back then, I instinctively knew that turning loose was the only way I could ever hope to someday hold on again. This is perhaps one of the most important things I've ever learned. And it was there, in the place of turning loose, that I met God. He took me by the hand and led me to the room. He sat me across from her. She and I sat opposite one another, sharing the same TV tray. On it, she had served 2 bowls of grits. Grits are hot cereal made from corn. Texans often eat it for breakfast. In her rocking chair, and I on a deep green hassock sat opposite one another. Also on the TV tray were 2 cups and saucers. One of the cups was for me. It contained hot chocolate. I leaned forward and peered into her cup. "What are you having?" I asked. "Hot tea," she answered. "May I have hot tea too?" Immediately she served me hot tea too. And there I sat with her in the room that felt safe from the thumping and bumping of the emotional storms which railed outside the room of faith. When I was in the room with her, I did not know where the storms were. I only knew they were outside, and I knew that as long as I was there and with her, the storms did not really matter, because in the room of faith, I am always safe. She seemed to recognize the peace I found with her and was quick to teach me an important truth. "God is here with you, and He will never leave you," she said. I leapt into her arms and memorized the shape of them. I did not know why this news pleased me so, but it did. And for a time, that was all that mattered. We rocked together for a long while. I noticed her hands were old. I looked into her beautiful gray-brown eyes, and I knew she was God's servant. It was then that I knew I could lean into her arms and rest. This was important because leaning would become very essential indeed. Subconsciously from within, centered among the many torn threads, and quite without provocation, a silent voice shouted for attention. Then another voice, which was very strong and closely woven together, said, "Wait." And for a while, there was a knot in time. Finally, figures had faces, but their faces didn't work. They seemed blind and deaf to me, blind and deaf to one another. Their blindness and deafness was far more frightening than those things assumed forgotten. In reaction to this fear, something in me, a bold, blended braid, became very stiff and self-assured. I decided when I grew up I would become neither deaf nor blind. Subconsciously from within, centered in the tangle of unraveled threads, an inner child's silent voice shouted for joy. Now she knew what to do while she waited. She began to weave the unbound threads of her side of the fabric. She picked out each knot with ease. In time, figures had hands, dark, groping, horrid hands. They also had mouths filled with stale, sweaty breath. I was only a child, but I was exploited as a woman in their earthy grasp. Old men and old women, all with nefarious purposes, groped their way through my soul until they found my beautiful blended braid. With their greedy, stinking hands, they pulled it from my weak, young fingers. Each strand of the braid which made up my soul self, my mind, my memories, my ideas, my dreams, all were fondled and soiled. And when they were finished, they congratulated themselves, waving my limp will in drunken indulgences. Subconsciously from within, the inner child quietly muffled an inward howl, and jagged-edged wounds stood open for no one to see. The inward child rocked back and forth, giving herself comfort while she waited. Then while she waited, she weaved without words. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. He took the inner child by her inward hand and led her to the room. "I'm glad you're here," the old woman said. I was just about to have hot tea. The inner child melted into the old woman's open arms. She lay her head on the old woman's chest and listened to the old woman's heart. She felt the old woman's chest rise and fall with her breaths, and she languished in the shape of the old woman's arms. They rocked together for a long while, and during those moments, the cords of life stretched out before them. One day, a gravestone spoke a truth the inward she nor the outward me wanted to see. We had to learn how to make our own tea. The room filled with faith was dark. The shades were pulled, the drapes were closed, cups sat anxiously awaiting their mistress to serve from them. But she didn't move to them anymore. They were alone, and so very far apart. Subconsciously from within, somewhere in the silence, a single scarlet thread was the only one left on the inward child's side of the fabric. All the others were ready. And now, with the old woman gone, the inward child knew it must be time. She tightened her grip on the single scarlet thread and pulled it hard. A knife-like thrust cut into my very soul. What was that? I wondered, but I had no idea. My conscious mind began to race. I was in a panic. From where did that horrible sudden pain come? God appeared in the path of my panic. Are you ready? I wasn't sure what he meant, but I blurted out, No, I am not ready. It's time, he ordered, and turned to walk ahead of me. The remnants of my once beautiful self grew tense, and I tightened my grip on my heartstrings. I gathered a threadbare breath, and with as much trepidation I shouted, I am not ready, though I did not know why. I will not do this, though I did not know what, and you can't make me. With this, I darted away from him in terror and rage. Subconsciously from within, a disquieted inner child voice asked, Father, is she coming? Wait, he answered. She looked into his wonderful eyes, then looked down at the woven fabric. She ran her small fingers over the strands and lightly stroked the single scarlet thread. Will you wait with me? She asked. Always, he smiled. I was taken aback by the painful pull in my soul and my struggle with God. As I gained my composure, suddenly there appeared before me a faceless child. Something about her was compelling. Then more children appeared all around me. I recognized their condition. They were battered, neglected, abandoned, and unfortunate. I knew what they needed. They needed my help. Then I spoke my wisdom over them. The only way to heal you of your past is to build strong barriers between the healthy self I create for you and the unhealthy circumstances from which I have rescued you. I took control and changed their lives effortlessly. I found it satisfying. I got so much pleasure from changing these children's lives that I anticipated the next child before I had finished with the last. Years passed. I forgot about the piercing pull, the room of faith, the form of the old woman's arms, the servant in her eyes, and most importantly, the master whom she served. I was obsessed with the activity of helping others by changing their lives. My world was a constant movement. I never rested. I didn't need to. I had my work. I had my call. Yes, I even convinced myself that all that I was doing, changing children's lives effortlessly, was part of my divine appointment on earth. Slowly, ever so slowly, the strands that were attached to all my menial intentions weaved themselves over me. Gradually, the light diminished, oh, so gradually. until after many years the strands formed over me a smothering tarp. Suddenly I was awakened by numbness. I was blind. I was deaf. How long had I been this way? I didn't know. The revelation of my plight shook me aware. Strangers stood all around me. Torment shrouded their faces as they wandered hither and thither with no apparent purpose or direction. We were truly deaf and blind. Theirs were not boundaries. Theirs were barriers. No, ours were not boundaries. Ours were monolithic structures that shut out everything. Just that. Everything. Nothing came in. Nothing went out. We called the great walls of distraction, hopelessness, smothered rage, and silence, grieving. Our friends. A world of walls imprisoned us. Someone approached me, and for a moment I thought I knew him. But then I wasn't sure. He stepped past my stone heart and reached into my darkness. Great light radiated from him. It illuminated the interior of my soul. The sight was horrific. The light cut into my eyes. I clamped them closed, and still it came through my tightly squeezed shut lids. He touched me. I saw awareness across his face. He spoke with giving, gentle, soft, loving words. I am with you. I will never leave you. But they seemed foreign and frightening words. I stood stock still. Only my eyes looked up, then left, up to him, away and down to the left, as if I were surveying the space for something I could not describe. Then a pain started in my lower back. Totally surrender yourself to me. I wept bitter tears. I despaired. I've already done that. I did that when I was a child. What do you mean? No. It wasn't a harsh no. It was a matter-of-fact no. And he said it with bait in his voice. There is something you have forgotten. What? I sincerely did not know. What have I forgotten? God grew still all around me, and the deafening silence hung in my ears. It was the silence as when the earth breathes in and then holds her breath just before a storm. And there is a truth of it. This was a great storm of my soul upon me. It makes it difficult to breathe and leaves me in a state of not knowing if I'm dreaming or awake. Then he spoke. His voice blew through me. It echoed along the walls of my soul like a wind calling through a corridor of a great stone cavern. Who do you say that I am? I was shaken awake. I blinked my eyes as even more awake of the total darkness in which I knelt, this tarp of life, of living, absent of his presence, dampened my every word to near silence. My voice, though all that I could be, was swallowed up in the tarp and the muffling enormity of the stone space we shared. Speaking seemed impossible, but there was nothing else. There was no excuse for not answering. There would be answering, and this was my time. At first, my words were feeble and pallid. You are my Father. You are He who has given me the questions and then given me the answers. You are He who created me, drew me out, stepped into the chasm of debts and willingly repaid that which I never could. You are he who died for me. You are he who is raised from the dead and intercedes for me in your own kingdom. You are my constant companion. You are he who knew me before any earthly part of me existed. You are he who purposed my life to prosper me, to give me hope. You are he who has given me life. You are God. You are God's Son. You are God's Spirit within me. You are God who is mysteriously 3 and 1 at the same time. You are he who promised from the very birth of whom you created in your image. You are he who will come again to reclaim all of us. My voice faded away for a moment. Then I felt it. The joyous reverberation of his presence. My eyes filled with tears. And smiling through those tears, I confessed, you are he who loved me first. And Father, you are he whom I love. With these words, God smiled, and the light of his face thundered along the stone dwelling of my heart. From all around him came the wind of his spirit and the sound of ripping fabric and tumbling stones. The cords of bondage that made up the smothering tarp of menial intentions unraveled before my eyes, and at my feet lay a walkway built from the stones. Years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, seconds. You, Lord, brought me along the path of stones, picking up, twisting, and weaving all the myriad of threads back together. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, the work went until one cloudy, quiet day I came to the end of the only thing left. That was the single scarlet thread. And the stone walkway disappeared into a dark future. At the other end of the scarlet thread was the inner child, spending time with you and waiting for the day she would at last begin to feel the gentle tugs, signaling that whatever lay on the other end of the thread was coming. When she felt those first few tugs, she asked the Lord, Lord, does she remember me? Yes, she remembers. She has spent many years in my word with my people in the care of professionals, my professionals specifically trained to minister when these kinds of situations come up. The inner child ran her little fingers over the single scarlet thread. She marveled at how frayed and faded parts of it had become. Will you stay here with me during this last little while? Always, he smiled. I could see the dark part of the path growing closer. I knew in my heart of hearts what I would see as the rest of the scene came into view. But I'll admit it. I was also afraid maybe I had imagined the whole thing, or I had imagined it wrongly, or I was just thinking what I thought I wanted to be there. Are you ready? The Lord said to me. Yes, Lord, I'm ready. With each pass of the weaving, a bit of the path came into the light. It's like when the sun comes up very early in the morning in a moonless sky. At first, everything is mostly black, and then very small details begin to take shape as if the grains of light after grains of light add to the scene. The expanse of the sky grows dark gray, then lighter gray, then a very slight hint of pink, then the very slight outline of 2 chairs and a little girl, around the age of 7. She sits beside a small table with 2 cups sitting in 2 saucers. I know my lines. What are you having? I asked her. A knowing smile spread on her little face, and her eyes crinkled at the sight as she answered, "Hot tea." "May I have hot tea too?" I asked. Immediately, she poured hot tea in both of our cups. I wove a little, and she wove a little. And at long, long last, we embraced and wrapped around ourselves the wonderful tapestry of our life. And there we are, tempted to faint under the agonizing trials of this world as the COVID-19 crisis threatens everybody all over the world. And so, today, as I get ready for a most important day, I turn inward to the storehouse of experiences from my life. There are many rooms contained there, but the finest of the rooms is the room in which I keep my strongest faith. This is the room where I can sit and listen to the thumping and bumping of the storms that rage outside my mind. It is in the room where I feel safest from the threats of danger or pain. When I am in the room, I am in a place of safety. It is during these times of safety that I am free to sit and weave stories like that surprising day, Kate and I realized that there was somebody else in the room of faith. Who's Kate? Oh, Kate is the inner child part of myself. I use my least used name, Kathy or Catherine, which depends on where on the timeline you land. Since my soul, that is the immaterial part of my flesh, that is my inner child, is far more than a Kathy or a Catherine. I landed on the name Kate. Landing on a name for her helps me help others understand that they too have a soul that is an immaterial part of their flesh, that is an inner child, that is like a very much younger version of themselves. Over the years, and across the vast landscape that has been my journey with the Lord, He has taught me that one of the ways He expects me to walk out His calling is to lead others to better know themselves as the Lord knows them. A very important part of this process is to allow the Lord to introduce them to themselves, just as He introduced me to myself those long years ago, when I first learned that in my heart lives a very young version of myself who holds my memories, important life lessons, and the seeds of eternity the Lord planted in what I now know is my heart of hearts. And so there, in the wonderful safety of the room of faith, bounded this wild-haired ball of energy, whooping and romping around until suddenly he seemed to realize he was not the only person in the room of faith the Lord gave him. Wait, what? Kate was none too less than none sure what to do about this wild thing that just barged into the room. She jumped under the table and pulled the chair close in so she was shielded. She made herself as small as possible and made herself silent. The boy stopped in his tracks and slowly bent down and peered through the chair legs at the small girl under there. He tried to catch her eye, but she had them squeezed closed and she was holding her breath. He looked around the room and then up to the rafters. He jumped up on the table and hopped and hopped and hopped until he got a grip on the rafters and pulled himself up. That was December 18th of 2009. George Lewis Cook III stepped into my life and all hell broke loose. What I mean is, his arrival began a 2-year project of chiseling off the final vestiges of hell still clinging to both George and myself. We would get through the first year in one another's lives before we knew that the Lord was indeed doing something impossible, something ridiculous, something nobody's going to believe, least of all us. He was knitting two who had far more X's than O's into a long last what they had wanted all their lives. A married covenant one, pure chaste, holy marriage. It was indeed sexual purity that started their first connection, and rightly so. So yes, everybody, including myself, thought it was completely idiotic to even entertain the idea that the Lord was leading me into another marriage. Oh, but today I can testify that in all actuality, I had never been married. I had entered into foolish contract after foolish contract, trying with all my might to contrive a thing called marriage. But it was anything but. Those contracts were built upon the shifting sands of deception, and one broken, eternally lost world after another. I had no earthly idea what the holy union of the Lord's marriage covenant created for one man and one woman to keep throughout their lives on this side of eternity was about. And neither did anybody else I knew. Oh, many other people had marriage, and they kept going their entire lives, and that was all well and good. But what could a holy union of the Lord's marriage covenant created for one man and one woman that keeps through their lives on this side of eternity look like for people like George Lewis Cook III and Kathy Ann O'Daniel or Catherine Suzanne Housewright after adoption? It was a mystery. It was like a puzzling at times and always downright terrifying in the process of coming to myself and learning of the reality of this inner child self, this union within myself of body, soul, and spirit. It was a tremendous mystery. The Lord's knitting George and me together was also indeed a mystery. Kate and I were in a very good place. The traumatic brain injury that had been at the root of my inability to see trains coming, leave alone know what to do after one of them ran over me again, had come to light. With the help of a woman who would become my best friend, I learned about the cognitive problems my damaged brain has and ways to get around them. Immediately upon my diagnosis and working up some clear and easy things to follow, adaptive tactics, my life became more stable than it had ever been. Now, Kate may have been hiding under the table, and Lewis was holed up in the rafters, but I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to bring out everything the Lord had taught me during the previous 52 years, and I was to survey George with what the Lord had been up to with him during his 54 years. And that's what we did. And while Lewis was the first soul or inner child with whom the Lord had given me conscious attention, he was also quick to remind me that in him, in the Lord, I had everything I needed to build a lifelong friendship between Lewis and Kate. And there we were, one in the rafters, one under the table, in the room filled with the strongest faith. And it's there that George and I feel safest to sit and have a cup of tea, or coffee in his case, and sit and weave stories like these.